We'll now call this regular workshop meeting of Jacksonville City Council to order. We have a copy of tonight's proposed agenda, and there are some minutes and consent items on here. There's 8 consent items, and you have a regular workshop meeting and regular meeting. I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda and the consent items and approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Right, so we're going to move on to the, actually there was 14.
Yeah, we noted that, Mayor, for the record.
So we're going to start off with our topic, first topic for tonight is the JOED update, and I'll turn it over to you to preface that, Dr. Woodruff.
For the last many years, we've had a great partnership with the JOED, which of course is the Jacksonville Onslow. Let's take 3 on that, Mayor. The Jacksonville Onslow Economic Development Group. Recently, as you know, Mark has become the lead seat, and Sheila is taking other responsibilities. We've had a great relationship. Both the city and the county help fund this, along with donations from the community. We've asked Mark to come tonight to give you an update. We try to have Mark available or Sheila available at least once every 6 months. So tonight we'd like to ask Mark to spend 15, 20 minutes kind of reviewing with you the proposals and the opportunities that they're invested in. So Mark, if you would.
Thank you, Dr. Woodruff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Dr. Woodruff said I had to keep this under 2 hours, so I'm going to really get into it briskly. But I have a few things to share with you. I think Ron Massey and I have been talking about 6 months about, some things are really good, some things aren't so good. We have a lot of places we can do some work, but at the end of the day, so what? What are we going to do and with what resources and to what end? So we are on a new course with a new strategic plan with some new leadership and a new chair, some new board members, and I kind of like to focus on where we're going with that in this particular session since we only have a few minutes. 2018-2019 year that we just finished up was a very successful year in terms of traditional scorekeeping for economic development. We personally engaged in bringing 650 plus new jobs to this county and helped our existing industries expand 125 new above average wage jobs, all with great benefits. So we're particularly proud of that. And the third thing we ventured into that's not so traditional is workforce development leadership, and remains the #1 economic development issue in this town, in this county, in this state, across the nation. So in our new approach to economic development, this is the definition that we use. It's about improving economic health, and that includes economic mobility, its quality of life, and its prosperity, which means wealth. And so we measure success, not necessarily in just the number of jobs that we announce or the dollars of investment that we announce, but what has it done for our tax base and for our residents' disposable income and the quality of life in this community. So with that in mind, everything else we did in our new strategic plan is based on that definition. And so this is a different way that you're going to see our updates, and that is we don't consider our work that we do 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 Monday through Friday as being economic development. If you want to turn that phrase around, a well-developed economy looks like that stuff on the far right we call impacts. You know, wages are coming up, tax base is growing, property values are up, home ownership, and things like poverty and unemployment and blight are going down. JOED does what it does with those inputs, with those resources you see on the left. The money that you folks and our other investors send us, and our board members and our office space and our vehicles and all that stuff is just an input to do some activities that turns into the dashboard you're used to seeing, which is how much private investment, how many jobs do we create. We don't believe that in and of itself is creating a developed economy, and I'm going to come back to this at the very end. So this is important to understand the structure of how our new strategic plan works. Okay, the good, the bad, and the so what. There's a lot of things to be proud of in this county. Really, the high school graduation rate is the single most important number to some company who's evaluating coming to an area. they all tell us across the board, from that one statistic, they can tell us about drug use, about crime, about divorce rates, about job tenure, about poverty rates and unemployment, all those things. But Onslow County's blessed with one of the highest in the state, 92%, something to really be proud of, and thank the Board of Education for their work. And of course, that extends to high educational rates, attainment rates, one of the higher ones in the states too. And that are folks that are beyond high school with 2-year and 4-year and beyond degrees. Low crime rate is phenomenal. It's the reduction in the crime rate the last 7 years here is something to be particularly proud of too. And again, it's something that site selectors look at when they're considering coming to a place. Ours is something to be really proud of. Economic engine, you have a big funnel here with the military presence, and no questions of that. We talk about that all the time. The county health ranking says Onslow County has the top number 4 in natural environment in the state out of 100 counties. That's something to be really proud of when you consider all the beautiful coastal counties and the mountains counties, and they put Onslow at number 4 for natural environment. That's an asset. Health outcomes are really good. I think we're number 11 in the state out of 100 counties for health outcomes. And we have this inflow-outflow ratio where about 22,000 people every day leave this county to go to work in some other county. And about 13,000 people come into the county, work, get their paychecks, and go back home. Primarily in Carteret and New Hanover. Those are the big numbers.
And we'll also point out our own finance director, but, you know, Gail, thank you very much for adding that.
And about 25,000 people live in Onslow and work in Onslow. So it's not uncommon to share a labor market, and there's no boundaries, political boundaries on where people go to work. But we like it when more people leave the county, get other people's money, and come back home, okay? So we'll talk about OPM, other people's money is a good deal. And then the other thing is that we're on an above average growth rate that's beyond what the demographer would have forecast for us 10 years ago. And I put an asterisk because it's not all good. There's some things we need to talk about when it comes to our high growth rate, but growth is good, okay? Growth is better than the other thing for sure. All right, some places where we have work to do. This is not a negative. This is just things to talk about when we look at those outcomes that we want. When we want higher wages and we want lower unemployment and less blight, we have to talk about places we need to do work. The most important thing that I look at statistically is leakage. Is how much money comes into that funnel, into this county every month, and then leaks back out. Okay, it doesn't stick around very long. That's a big number. I don't want to get into details because I don't have enough time, but I can. I think when I come back next time, we want to drill down into that a little bit. Above average unemployment, it's up up right now from last year and 30% above the state average. Poverty is 50% higher than it was 20 years ago. We are the 4th lowest wage paying county in the state. So that makes us number 96 out of 100 for private sector wages. The average weekly wage this month is $706, and the state average is $1,026. Quality of life factors, the shrinking retail surplus. Some of the folks in here that are on our board have seen that slide. That's alarming, where this county has a certain demand for retail product, and they've traditionally, our retailers have sold 124% of that demand, meaning other people's money was coming into the county, buying retail, taking it back to other counties. That's down to about 2% right now. So that's something to watch in terms of the tax base, as well as employment. Home ownership rate is low, 52% and falling. That traditionally would be alarming, but I'm not real sure whether to be alarmed about that or not, but it's something we need to talk about. And then the high growth rate will come with some growing pains. That is just a place where we need to be talking about as we go forward. And this is the neutral. This is, I put this slide in, I talk about it when I talk about strengths and weaknesses, because a lot of times when we look at those statistics where we have to do work, I call them the bad stats, there's a lot of things that come back in the form of denial. Okay, let's just be blunt. We need to question that methodology. We need to figure out, those people don't know what they're talking about when they say these things. But the thing is, One I hear a lot about is just the military community, and not counting active duty incomes and everything. No, really, every military community is included in the analysis, okay? And so when you only see one and it's yours, we need to talk about some things, right? So some of the folks in here have seen a slide where I compared us to the other military communities in North Carolina, and we really come out on top in a lot of areas. But when it comes to bad statistics, it's not because we're a military community. We do not have a low cost of living. We're the same actually this year as Durham, for whatever that's worth. Healthcare level of service is about average, and so are the rest of these things on this chart, except for tourism, where I think we need to have a discussion about tourism impact. I compared our tourism impact here, and I'm not a tourism guy, I'm an economic development generalist, but the tax relief to our taxpayers per capita from tourism is $107 a year. So that's the lowest of the 7 counties around here on the coast. And the next closest one is Pamlico County with $252 per resident. So that's probably something we ought to talk about, and yet we have the 3rd highest number of people engaged in employed in tourism, 1,800 people employed in tourism. So, as I'm not saying these are good or bad, they're just neutral and things we can talk about, all right? And so what? This is reflecting back on that definition of what economic development is. What is a developed economy? We approach our new strategic plan with some new paradigms. And the first one is that not all jobs are great jobs. A job is not necessarily worthy of having a party, okay, or investment. Community development has usually had a wall between it and economic development. So we're beyond that. Community development speaks to quality of life, which is economic development. Okay, it's one of those things we can measure, and we will be measuring, and we'll be focused not on traditional measurements that you've seen on our dashboard once a year at the annual meeting, but these things down here: wages and income, property values in the tax base, economic mobility, business diversity, and what are we doing to reduce poverty, blight, and unemployment. How am I doing, Richard? And so look, so the majority of our time, the majority of the investment of our resources that we've been blessed with, including money and time and talent and our board, will be on one of these 2 activities: attracting money or retaining money. Okay, so it's one thing to attract a lot of money. $5 billion a year comes into Onslow County. We want, to the maximum extent possible, keep that money here a little while longer than it traditionally has stuck around. And so those are some of the ways that our activities will be guided by those 2 activities. So here's our strategic goals. First one is growing our community's economic development capacity. We'll do that through strategic planning, through economic development awareness, just what I'm doing here today, through sites and building product that we can market, through improving our skilled workforce to the extent we can, infrastructure, the various adding options for incentivizing business growth, business attraction, beyond just asking the public sector to do that. Entrepreneurship, and also maximizing the assets that are our hub zones and our opportunity zones. The expanding the value proposition to investors, making sure that you know that you're getting your money's worth out of your investment in JOED every year, and we appreciate that more than you know. Some complex economic development issues don't fit in the traditional JOED wheelhouse, or the chamber, or tourism, or the sports commission. Some of those issues overlap. And so my board wants us to fill that void when necessary for those issues that are bigger than one piece of the economic development world. Strategic planning, and of course the other has to do with internally building leadership and physical foundations it takes to do this plan.
Now, Mr. Warden has been on the board. The mayor has a seat, but because of other obligations, he and Mr. Warden have agreed that he will represent the city there. Ron attends these meetings. You've had a good overview. But I would like to ask Mr. Warden and Ron if they would like to add some things about where Joed, as you see it, is headed. So, Mr. Warden, comments?
Well, you know, one of the thoughts that we've had is of course, traditionally, the economic development folks, we see them as trying to attract new manufacturing, with sort of the old definition. As we know, manufacturing continues to decrease here in the United States. So we've still got all of these economic development folks nationwide that are chasing a smaller pie. The pie is getting smaller for manufacturing. We also realize that economic development is more than just trying to attract manufacturing jobs. So I think the board has put their heads together, come up with a strategic plan. They spent several months under Mark's and Sheila's and a consultant's work trying to come up with, all right, let's talk about what can we go after and what is the definition of economic development. And we realized that, you know, we talked about the manufacturing. The other thing that's important to economic development is hanging on to the people that we've got and helping them to grow. So, you know, I think Sheila has done a good job of doing that in the past. And I think Sheila's done a good job of attracting new businesses, but that's going to be a continual process. But economic development is more than just chasing manufacturing jobs. And I think trying to come up with a definition and trying to come up with how do we address the changing things that are happening nationwide to where we become more focused on economic development. We realize that some things fall through the cracks, as Mark said a little earlier. There are certain things that don't really fall into a chamber's silo or a tourism silo or the city or the county. And I think we've asked Joed staff to, if there's something out there that doesn't do that, sort of be the county-wide coordinator for economic development, which and more so just than chasing manufacturing type jobs. So they're going to be fleshing that out and working that out as we work through the future issues. I think this was in response more to the strategic plan into things are changing nationwide, and unless you're changing with it and recognizing the trends and the developments that are coming on, then I think you're falling behind. So can I mention the fundraising that's going on?
The feasibility study.
Actually a feasibility, right. The board has hired a consultant to prepare a feasibility study for getting more private sector investment into Joed. And at some point that feasibility study will be presented. There'll be a goal, a stated goal of what they wish to raise, and I'm hopeful that we'll get the entire Oslo community excited about investing in our own economic development here. And I think that's enough. I think I've said enough. But anything else did I forget something, Ron? Anything I forgot?
Well, I think another thing, of course, with the changing economy is entrepreneurship. And I know Councilman Jackson is interested in incubator.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's been discussed with the strategic plan, is what we need to do as a community to create opportunities, to set up an incubator and have a place where our future entrepreneurs, especially with exiting military, there's a lot of ideas out there. And the other thing that, of course, Mark covered on some of the points with having to do with quality of life and economic mobility. And what we want to do is make sure that our efforts, and we've talked a little bit about economic mobility, the home ownership thing. We need to do a little bit more to get some of the individuals that want to move into home ownership prepared and more opportunities for that, which then helps our tax base, helps reduce slum and blight. So there's so much opportunity for synergism, and I agree that Joed in some cases can help call the right people together, organize the effort, so we can all do more to row together in that.
to jump in here a minute. And first of all, I appreciated being invited to your workshops and learn a lot, and you've done a lot of work. I take my hat off for you, all for that. One of the questions I have for you, Mark, is that with the, I know we are losing a lot concerning retail shrinkage. Have you done any measurements concerning what taxing the internet, when we're able to start doing that, what gap that might fill? Or do you have?
You know,
have any guys
I
measuring
don't
that?
know, but I'm gonna probably, like everybody else in this room, hit Amazon every now and then. And I pay taxes. I pay sales tax. I pay North Carolina sales tax when I use it. But I don't know if do you know, Dr. Woodruff, if there's a difference between some online purchases and others?
We haven't really had many discussions about what we're seeing in our sales tax revenue, and that's something we probably need to learn a little bit more about.
Well, it is alarming when the surplus goes down, but I don't think, to your point, Brian, that it's a function of internet shopping. We know we have $123 million a year leakage in groceries, right? So that's probably not internet
Why
shopping.
is that?
Why is it? I can only speculate that it's 21,000 people leaving the county every year and buying their groceries wherever they're working and coming home. When they come back home, they want to stay home. That's pure speculation. And it lines up with a $70 million a year leakage in gasoline, in gas station sales. So between the two, those are the two biggest sources of retail leakage in the county, groceries and gas. And it may, if we spent $50,000 on a consultant, have them tell us it's the 21,000 people leaving the county to work somewhere else every day.
Not a good investment. What about the work that Kirsten Crestfield is doing? Where are we with that?
Thank you for bringing that up. That study concludes next week. That was a study that the Keenan Flagler Institute has been doing for us on the demand for incubator and accelerator services here in town. And we'll have the results of that study at the end of next week. But they've been surveying folks around town, both private and public sector folks. And we've also had people in from other towns that are running successful incubators and accelerator programs to find out their best practices. We'll have a lot more to say about that when we're together next time for sure.
All right, thank you.
Other questions or thoughts? I think it's fair to say that Joed has done a very good job relative to their past mission. I think the important thing is that we, as a community, need to recognize that Joed, if their function is to attract industry, that's going to be a function that's very difficult to fulfill. And that's what the board of directors, even though Ron sits in on behalf of the management, obviously Mr. Warden sits in on behalf of the mayor and council, but the reality is economic development is now going to be redefined. And as a community, we have to understand that economic development includes building new tourism opportunities. It includes building new retail opportunities, new medical opportunities. That's economic development. It is no longer about, are you going to attract an industry that makes widgets? If you can, that's great. But our focus as a community is really being redefined by the board. And that's something that I commend you all for doing, because what's the old saying? Doing the same thing, hoping for a different outcome is just insane. Well, I wasn't gonna use that word, but since you did, I will. It's a good NC State word, insane.
Describes most of the graduates that took NC State, yes.
Yeah, and also a lot of the management of the city, I'm sure, so that's good.
Mark, what do you think is the biggest drawback as far as enticing military-based type business here? You got that huge military complex here between here and Cherry Point and the air station. Why do you think it is that we're not getting more military-based industry in this area?
So defense contracting, all right, so that's a great question, and it's one I've been grappling with here for 12 years. And it simply is, we just don't have the labor market here. So it's interesting that there's a big function going on, is it this week, Ron? It has to do with all the billions of dollars that are coming for construction at Camp Lejeune in the wake of Hurricane Florence. And it's being held in Charlotte. I mean, we're just not gonna have the big construction companies that it takes to repair that $1.5 billion worth of damage. We don't have the workforce to support. I get calls every day from contractors on base. And what's up with the workforce? I go, well, look, there's only a couple 100,000 people down here, and all but 4% of them are already working, you know? And then most of the others are in some kind of training program, so they can work. So I think that's the bottom line, but the so what of that question is, what are we gonna do about it? We're gonna build an incubator, accelerator program. We're gonna maximize the hub zone that is in the city here. We have some housing challenges there that Ron and Richard and I have been talking about, and that's gonna hold back the hub zone development. I think if we're gonna build businesses specifically for defense contracting dollars, if we're gonna have them here, we're gonna grow them here.
I think one of the other parts, let me answer that, if you don't mind for a moment. Part of the other is what's happening out at the Burton Park with the new technical school out there. We have a great high school education. We have a great high school education system and a great high school graduation rate. But the question is, are the people who are not going to college getting out of high school with the skills that are actually needed for some of the economic opportunities, I'm not going to use the word industry, that want to come here? The reality is, we need more plumbers, we need more electricians, we need more welders. If you look at the tremendous money that's going to be spent at the base, it's construction money. And if you don't have qualified brick masons and all of those skills, they're going to come in from somewhere else. They're going to be here for a year in our hotels, which will certainly help TDA money. But then what happens? They're gone again. And that's what Mark is talking about with the labor force. I know there are people watching tonight who say, well, yeah, we have a lot of people who are looking for jobs. That's fine. But if they don't have the skills for the jobs that are actually coming, then you're gonna have that labor come in from a different community. Mayor, I apologize for interrupting.
Well, I'm sure that we work closely with one of the greatest community colleges in the state of North Carolina to help, get people prepared for these types of jobs. I'm sure that's something that you do work with as far as.
Actually, now more so than ever, we've cobbled together a working group that includes every workforce development stakeholder in this town. And that's Miller Mott and the community college and K through 12 and Joe Ed, and the Workforce Development Board and the Chamber of Commerce. And we have been working on an innovative way to crack the biggest nut that exists with workforce development. That is the employability of our entry-level workforce. All right, the turnover is outrageously expensive for our employers, and they make a hiring decision, and it takes forever to make a hiring decision because the pool is small of available workers, but they have really high turnover rates. So we have come up with a proposal that I want to share with you next time I come to see you that's bold and it's innovative, and we are doing a prototype with that, and it's kind of a boot camp sort of thing where we are putting together a program where that worker, that new hire, can come away from the company for 3 weeks of intensive, collaborative, experiential, hands-on workshop thing that teach you the real lessons that you need to know before you get on the floor, before you get in the plant, before you get in the retail store, wherever you're going to work, about these issues that every year the employers tell us in increasing numbers that they're having challenges with what they call employability, which other people might call soft skills. But we're attacking that. So yes, the community college and every other workforce development stakeholder here is working more closely now than ever.
Good to know. One more question, Ron. The rail service that we were working on, where is that
Well,
at now?
it's kind of in limbo right now because of the hurricane. The hurricane took out 2 of the trestles. I noticed in the package of projects, there is a project that the base has got in to replace those 2 rail trestles. So until the rail becomes operational, it's not going to benefit anybody. But that Senator Tillis is basically sort of assisting with getting what agreements need to be put into place so that the commercial companies can use the rail. But we got, hopefully both those things will be kind of going on a parallel path, and it'll get repaired and we'll have a contract in place.
I think given the momentum that is going on with Joed, it might be advantageous to have, instead of waiting 6 months, to have them back maybe in early October, because they have a lot of new thoughts, a lot of fundraising programs. Mr. Warden, do you have an opinion on that?
Probably Mark would be a better opinion. I don't know when all these little projects will come together. I say little, but when do we get the feasibility study back? I was thinking it was November, so October, November.
We get that in late October. That's one of a dozen things, but I tend to agree with you. 90 days, that's what Ron and I discussed. I think it's a good battle rhythm.
Well, you and Ron work out a schedule, but we do appreciate the fact that y'all are now on our regular workshop schedule.
Yes, sir. It's an honor to be here with you folks. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark.
Thank you for coming to be with us tonight.
Appreciate it.
See you tomorrow.
Sir. Mayor and Council, the second thing we'd like to discuss this night is a community update regarding the crosswalk and pedestrian safety matters at Jacksonville High School. Anthony, please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. To revisit the concept of insanity for those of us who have had school-age children at home every day for the past 2 months, we're all looking forward to August 26th. And of course, that's when the school year starts back and they get to go fill their minds with good stuff. That being said, wanted to take the opportunity to give you an update as to what's going on with the Jacksonville High School pedestrian crossing. As you recall, we've done a lot of things over the years to help improve visibility and safety in that area. Many of these things are on the screen. Of course, we have the flashing pedestrian signs, we have the pedestrian refuge island, the bollards that you see, high visibility pavement markings, but then we also have the recently installed rumble strips. All of those have certainly brought more awareness to the area, but unfortunately, we still continue to have incidents. So in December and in January, unfortunately, there were 2 pedestrian crashes out there that have really caused us to take a closer look at this area and to determine what additional can be done to hopefully make this the safest place possible for folks crossing the road. Several months ago, we got approval from DOT to construct what's called a HAWK signal. That stands for High Intensity Actuated Crosswalk. So I think they got pretty creative in coming up with HAWK. Maybe they just like the way it sounds, I don't know. But I personally feel that this is a permanent solution in that area. The reason being is because it's very intuitive for the driver and it's very intuitive to the pedestrian. So the way it works is when a pedestrian pushes the button, it starts to flash yellow. We all know what a flashing yellow is as a driver. It's caution. You're going to have to either slow down or come to a stop. After a period of time, the signal turns red as it's shown on the screen here. Red means stop. We all know what that means too. From the pedestrian's perspective, there's a walk and don't walk sign. And of course, we've all used those before. So again, on both sides, people are very used to using these things. This brings a high level of visibility from a driver's perspective, and hopefully it can also allow us to potentially better manage the traffic in that area, because all of us have been in a situation where there's just a continuous line of pedestrians crossing, just one after the next, after the next, after the next. We can help better manage that both on the pedestrian side as well as the vehicle side with this system. Our intent is to connect this into ITS, so we will have full control over it at any time from our traffic center. The initial approval from DOT had us installing more of a temporary facility. The diagram here shows what would have been a wood pole installation. We're very familiar with that. Most of the intersections in the city has wood poles at all 4 corners. Of course, there's a span wire that goes between those poles that the signals hang from. The benefit of this, of course, was that it was cheap and it could have happened quickly. And that's why we were hopeful that this would be in place before school went into session. But as we went through the design process, as we did utility coordination, we ran into pretty much a catastrophic issue. I know we're all very aware of this area and that there are power lines on the north side of the roadway that run basically right beside Jacksonville High School. Unfortunately, those are of a height and of a voltage that prevent us from putting a pole on the north side of the roadway. So even though this was a good initial concept, that's something that we can no longer pursue. The bad news is that's caused some delays. It's also caused the project to increase in cost. But the good news is we've been able to come up with another design. I think that this is a much more eye-appealing design, and this is also a much more permanent installation. So the picture on the bottom right of the screen, it's not a very good one, but I selected it because this is almost exactly what the Hawk will look like when it's installed. When DOT built the Jacksonville Parkway, I'm sure you recall what it looked like before the parkway went in. There was a big intersection at Marine Boulevard with mast arms that had signals on it. You turn right to go to Western, you turn left to go downtown. They decommissioned those mast arms and stored them at their yard for however long it's been since the parkway went into place. They still have those, and that's in fact one of the mast arms. That's where the mast arms are coming from that we're going to use for this project. So that saved us a lot of time as well as a lot of cost. Unfortunately, because these are in such demand and there are so few vendors, if we had to buy it new, it would have taken 16 to 18 months just to get it. So this is a very positive thing that they were able to have it in stock, ready to deploy. The other challenge with this concept is that it required an easement on the New Market Center property. And if we were to go through the DOT process, that can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years. And that just simply, 2 years was not appropriate from our perspective. This needs to happen sooner rather than later. So I just simply called the property manager of New Market Center, excellent guy. He was very understanding of what we were trying to accomplish. He immediately contacted the property owner. Property owner contacted his attorney. Everybody supported what we were trying to do. And in less than a week, he signed the easements and got them back to us. So right now, we're in a very good position to execute. However, as I mentioned, we are not going to have it in the ground and operational before school. So the revised timeline is here on the screen. Throughout the design process too, we identified a couple of other things that were going to need to happen. It's not necessarily just putting up the Hawk, but we have to modify the school zone signs. I'm sure we're all familiar with those, driving through there a number of times. There's a picture of them at the bottom of the screen there. Those would be in conflict with the Hawk signal, so they have to come down, and we're going to mount them on the shoulder of the roadway, similar to what you see in other areas of Jacksonville. One that comes to mind in particular is Bell Fork Elementary School. They have the most up-to-date version of these school flashers. DOT is the resident expert in building mast arms and foundations, so they're going to take on that role. They're going to bid the project, hopefully within the next few weeks to next month. And if we're able to get the interest of a contractor, because of course that has been a challenge lately, it's just getting contractors to bid on small projects like this, we could be under construction in September with commissioning of the signal occurring in October. In the meantime, because we knew that we weren't able to execute on this, what we've done is we have worked with Duke Energy to upgrade all of the street lighting in that particular area. So we took them from one of the lower level street lighting wattage fixtures to the highest level that they have available. And so that's shining a lot more light onto the roadway, hopefully to improve some level of safety in the meantime. The thing that I'm most proud of with this project is that When the second crash occurred and everyone was kind of in shock, it would have been really easy for any one of these stakeholders or all of them on the screen to basically point fingers at the other and say, it's not our problem, it's your problem. But we are one city and we are one community. That did not happen. We got together in a room, representatives from city, DOT, and Onslow County Schools, and we figured out a way to make the project go. None of us had a blank check to make it go immediately, but we knew that we could cobble together the expertise and the resources to make it happen. So as the city, we've done a little bit of design work for the project, and we will offer in-kind construction, very similar to what we did with Plantation Boulevard over on Gum Branch Road. We actually built that traffic signal. DOT, they finished the design and they will construct and install the mast arm. That's what they're best at. They can do the physical construction of that particular piece. In Onslow County Schools, they don't have a strong background in traffic signal construction or operation, so they were best suited to financially contribute by providing equipment. What we did was we bid out all the equipment, and then they reimbursed us for the associated cost. All that being said, this is a great partnership. The project has been delayed. It is moving forward though. And ultimately, I think something that looks like this is a much better solution than putting some more wood poles out there with some more wires. We have enough along that corridor. So that concludes my update. Do you have any questions for me about when and where, how?
Any questions?
Again, the date that school starts back is?
August 26th. It's marked on the calendar at my house.
I'm
Just,
sure.
I
And that's
do have a
because-
comment, just since for the general public, that tonight, as part of our consent agenda, we did have a school zone set up on the Gum Branch side of Jacksonville High School. So 45 miles an hour will be going down to 35 during school hours in a stretch. I don't know exactly where it's starting. I'm sure it's starting at the light there at the
It starts at the
Henderson
intersection
Drive.
of Henderson
Gum Branch.
and Gum Branch. And then
It
it
goes
will,
to-
500 feet on the other side of Indian.
Okay, so past the fire station, for
That's right.
folks, for frame of
Yes.
reference. So motorists, be aware that if you're traveling on Gum Branch Road, that you will have a school zone.
and that, I'm sorry, sir.
That's all right, put school zones, speed reductions. So.
That's correct. And it will go from a 45 to a 35 mile per hour zone. That's the standard treatment for a school zone, reduce it by 10 miles per hour. It is very, very likely that all of the ordinances and paperwork will be in line and the signs deployed for that to go into effect before school starts. So I'm sure Sean will have a good time out there when the 26th comes around. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent work by the staff and the cooperation. Any other questions on this one?
Good job on getting all that together.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Maybe we'll have a safe year this year.
We will.
Safer.
Also, one additional comment on, I want to remind people that the second accident actually happened well after school hours. There are many people who cross this street during school. There are many people who cross this street after school hours and all summer long. So the Hawk system, once installed, will be there 24 hours a day, year-round, for people to use, not just school students. Mayor and Council, the third item we'd like to discuss on the workshop tonight is the possibility of securing additional police officers through the federal COPS grant program. I have a number of police officers who are going to be involved in that along with the chief. So Mike, if you bring your staff up, I'm going to step back a minute. How many chairs do you need?
I'll sit back there.
We're good right here, Dr. Wood.
Y'all look very good up here.
It means in with everything.
I'm dressed in a suit, I gotta have y'all do that.
First of all, we want to thank Mayor and Council for hearing this. You've always been supportive of of understanding the needs of the department. It's never ever been an issue of needing officers, it's been an issue of financing officers, understanding the financial needs of the entire city as a whole. So we thank you for the time that you're providing us to speak with you today. So we want to begin with what our philosophy is. Jacksonville Police Department, community policing is our philosophy. Our officers are expected to understand why crimes are happening and trying to partner and work with the community to resolve the underlying issues of those crimes. That is the only true way to actually eliminate crime in an area, is to understand what's going on and what's causing it. The crime itself is just a response to what else is going on. This is we are firmly committed to this. Chief is happy. We are receiving a community policing award from IACP in October, and that is a direct relationship to how much time and input we put into our community policing and how much we believe in it. But we can't do our job without partnership from our citizens. No police agency can. So it's part of our foundation. But what you've also heard earlier in the economic development, it's also part of the one community, one city. And that is the council's foundation, is the one city effort. So community policing, these are the events, these are the things that we need to be doing. These are the things we like to be doing to engage our community and involve them in the conversation of what's going on.
And if I may, community policing is actually two things. It's actually the community engagement, which is extremely important for us. I mean, the front porch roll calls, the coffee with the chief, the coffee with the cop, all those things are set to engage the community. The second part is the problem-solving piece that we've been working on a number of different issues, whether it's the child abuse issues, whether it's the mental health issues or the substance abuse issues that we're dealing with in the community. So the community policing process actually is those two things. And I think when we talked about the award for the ICP, one of the things that it really does dovetail into the One City, Our City, My City campaign. I think that was very instrumental in us reducing use of force over the last number of years, and how our community engagement has been involved. I think you saw that last night with roughly around 12,000 people coming downtown and interacting with police officers and in our police officers from our department, but for the entire county. So that was a very nice event.
So two types of policing. Reactive, officers in cars, responding to calls for service. Proactive, getting out of the car. Responding calls for service, citizen calls for service, it's very reactive. They're not able to get out. They're not able to engage. They can only engage what's going on at that moment. The training, the time, paperwork, everything else that's associated with those calls for service also take away from that time to be able to get out and engage the community. The proactive side, community engagement, that's us getting out. That's talking with citizens. It's meeting people where they are. We want to engage people not on a call for service. We want to engage them where they're at, as Officer Barton did with this young man. Trying to understand what their perceptions are, because every piece of our community has different perceptions of what's going on, even in their area and the city as a whole. So it's understanding what those perceptions are and breaking down those barriers.
I like to tell the story about the proactive policing issue. Is that we had somebody parked in a particular area, and the officer went there and engaged that person. It was nothing serious, but he wouldn't engage that person. Something about him he was unclear about. He took and did a field interview card and noticed the car and everything, all that other information. Well, that person actually left and drove outside the city to another jurisdiction and committed a robbery. Of course, the officer had the names and the information and everything. But that's the concept of being proactive. It's being able to engage the community much more focused than having to respond to the calls in a reactive manner. And that's really how we prevent crimes from occurring. So that has been our goal, and that is really the tenet of community policing, engaging community and trying to prevent crimes from occurring. Most departments do a good job of managing crime. When that occurs, we respond. When we're talking about proactive, we're actually talking about preventing crime, which is something that takes a lot more work and a lot more community involvement.
So what we're starting to see is that we're starting to slide towards reactive. As you heard again earlier in the economic development, our crime rates have been dropping, have been low. We are recently were denied federal grant funding because our violent crime rate was below the national average. Over the last 2 years, we're starting to see that violent crime rate start to rise. Aggravated assaults have been on their increase for the last 2 years. You can see by this, our citizen-initiated calls have increased. Our self-initiated with that begins to decrease. And the administrative calls, that's court, that's training. And a lot of that training comes from a lot of the programs that we're putting in place to engage the community. So our de-escalation, our use of force has dropped from 147 incidents in 2018 to 23, or 2017 to 2018 to 23. And that's a direct result of that de-escalation training.
Actually, from 2012 to 2018.
So that takes time. The training takes time, plus the time on the call. Because when you're doing crisis intervention, another training that we do, and dealing with mental health issues, that's not something you can rush through. It takes time to de-escalate someone. It takes time to work them through a crisis intervention, a crisis when they are in that crisis moment. It's not on our timetable. It's on their timetable. And you can see from, I believe my next slide. So from 2012 to 2018, you can see how much of an increase we've had. Citizen-initiated calls have almost doubled since 2012. That is where the citizens are actually calling the police department. That's not the officer stopping cars. That is direct contact from citizens. Our self-initiated has dropped, you can see. And our administrative, that time in court, that time in training, that time doing reports and documenting the events has more than doubled, excuse me. Even this year, 7 months into the year, we're almost 10,000 calls for service, a combination of all of these above where we were last year. So it's still on the rise.
I might indicate the citizen-initiated calls are not necessarily an increase in crime. They're an increase in demand for service. And I think that's part of our community engagement. As we engage the community and people feel more comfortable with it, they're going to call us on a number of different issues. So those citizen-initiated calls, while they do represent a lot of different things, I think a lot of it has been our outreach and been our community engagement, getting involved with the community. The community officer program, they're very engaged in those communities. And I think that's increased the number of calls from citizens.
So again, we look at, do we want to be reactive or do we want to be proactive? The challenge is balancing those two. It's balancing the engagement with the community and balancing crime response. These are some of the programs and things that we have in place to help try to balance those things that you may not be aware of. One is our LEAD program, which is law enforcement assisted diversion. This is when officers come across someone who has a substance use disorder and are in possession of user type amounts of a substance. They can actually divert them from the court system and into treatment, which is where we want them. Because the other crimes that come with substance abuse disorders are really what we're trying to stop. So the only way to stop those is to get people engaged in treatment and move them away from substance use, which then prevents them or keeps them from engaging in larcenies, engaging in violence, engaging in shoplifting, engaging in petty thefts, and the crimes that go with those. Our crisis intervention, we've talked about our overdose response team. We have officers that actually go out after an overdose to follow up. Again, trying to get people we partner with the county, with our community paramedics, and go out and try to get them into treatment and into those programs. Our de-escalation training and the techniques we use. The chief spoke earlier about the child abuse programs, our domestic violence programs. Just this year, our victim advocate has worked with over 70 victims of domestic violence to attempt to attain the electronic domestic violence protective orders, where we actually do those in-house now through the court system with judges. DDAX is a program that we're looking at starting. We have some training coming to us soon. This is data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety. So the short version, we take a look at where traffic crashes are, where crimes are occurring, where they overlap. That's where we concentrate efforts. Part of that concentration of effort is actually bringing in community stakeholders from those areas as well to see what they believe the issues are or what they can tell us is going on that we may not be aware of. And then the programs that we have that we get out and we actually engage people are Coffee with the Cop, Coffee with the Chief, our DARE and GREAT program. We still do neighborhood block parties with different communities. And of course, our Citizens Academy, so people can learn what law enforcement actually is all about. Another one that is coming that we're gonna have to address is the Raise the Age program. That is, the state goes into effect December 1st. That's where 16 and 17-year-olds will now be treated as juveniles. In most cases, there's still cases that are non-divertible type offenses that they would still go through the adult system with programs, but in 2018, there was about 45% of all 16 and 17-year-old offenders actually got arrested. Well, that's something the Raise the Age is going to bring down. But with that means more time as well. Because the arrest is the easy thing to do. It's quick. You get it done and get them out. That's not what we want to do. We don't want to put our 16 and 17-year-olds in jail. We want to find the resources, find them the help that they need, and get them out of those situations so that they can have a successful life, so that they can go into training programs and get good jobs and have successful careers. So, being proactive, solving problems together with our community, that is the foundation of community policing. And community policing is at the heart of the One City. So that's why we're here today. That's why we're talking about grants. To give you some background, 2010 COPS grant was 2010 and 2011, the last time we received the COPS hiring program grants. We received 6 in 2010. The salary and benefits were fully funded at that time. In 2011, we received an additional 2 through council authorization, and salary and benefits were fully funded at that time as well. Again, council has never had a concern with us needing officers. The concern has been funding the officers. 2 years ago, we brought to you a 5-year plan to add 6 officers every year for 5 years to get us 30 officers, to get us closer to where we should be in our hiring. But understanding that there have been some financial challenges, especially in this last year. It wasn't even broached just because of the hurricane and the state requirements that we understand. We understand it's a challenge. You have to balance, council has to balance the entire needs of the city, every department, and all the citizens. So we've been looking and trying to find opportunities. So our opportunity now is the 2018 and 2019 COPS hiring grant. 2018 was suspended due to the federal injunction for sanctuary cities. So they're going to be opening both of these grants. It's going to be a very short turnaround. That's why we're bringing this to council now, because the moment they open it, it's going to be flooded and it's going to be a very short window to submit for the grants. Until they're actually released, we're not going to know the exact funding. Historically, late 90s, the COPS hiring grant funded at 100%, then 75 and 50 the subsequent years. 10 and 11, it was funded at 100% for all 3 years. I believe 2017, they only funded 75% for all 3 years. So we don't know at this time what these grants are actually going to fund.
Most likely it will be something similar to 100% the first year, 75 the second, and 50% the third. That's basically, and the short window is because, you know, the federal budget starts in October, and because these grants have been delayed for a year now, over a year over the immigration issue, they're really going to push hard to get them out. So we didn't think we'd have enough time to actually have a discussion about it because of that short turnaround time.
So we're gonna try to provide as much information for you to make those decisions as you can. So overall, one officer costs the city $125,500. That is the equipment and the salaries and benefits. The COPS grants do not cover equipment. They only cover the salaries and benefits. So if funded at 100%, the equipment would be $68,700 for one officer, and salary and benefits would be covered by the grant. We also recognize that some of that cost we can offset a little bit by our current inventory with uniforms and equipment that we have already, and current vehicles that we have in place and some things that we can do there. So anywhere that we can offset those costs, it is our intention to try to help offset them. So understanding that, we want to provide options. Obviously, option one is what we would request. Option one is 6 grant positions. The city of Jacksonville, this is the total cost. This is not any of the offsets. Is $412,000, and the grant funded would be $340,000. A note on the $400,000, again, would be debt service involved in that. So that would be costs out over 3 years. The first year would be roughly $210,000, and then finance would have to do the amortization for the other 2 years. So,
And let's talk a little bit about why we chose 6 positions. So there's 6 shifts. Each shift would get 1 police officer, and they would be assigned to patrol. I mean, our focus has been over the last, since I've been here, and we focus most of our resources on patrol if we can. Because that's where we make the most impact, and that's where we want to focus what our efforts are. So this particular option would give us 1 officer for each shift. So that's why we chose 6 at this particular point. I might also talk a little bit about the grant. This is not I know when the mayor applied for some of these grants, it was kind of a rubber stamp. Well, it's competitive now. So there's a number of reasons that you can apply for the grant. The first one is violent crime rate, which is going to affect us to some extent. So the number of officers will depend on what our violent crime rate is as we focus on that. And it can also focus on terrorism or terrorism prevention. And then the third thing would be community policing. So there are some options as to how we apply and what kind of program we apply for. But the main focus will be on patrol and making sure that we continue our quest to improve the community policing process that we have.
So this is a 3-year grant.
3-year grant.
It's a diminishing percentage. At the end of 3 years, what is the obligation?
The obligation is that, or has been, because we haven't got the final grant. Has been is that you pick them up for that next year, and then after that you can decide what you're going to do with the funding.
One of the things that we would like to, and by the way, I'm not Mayor Pro Tem Lazara, I did not bring any pizzas in tonight, so, but I did want to join the conversation. For the last several years, the police department has asked for additional personnel. It's consistently been not supported by the manager's office from a financial standpoint. It's not a standpoint of need, it's a standpoint of how do you fund it. When the police command staff sitting before you tonight came to me and talked to me about this, the first question I asked was, can you justify the need? And they told me yes. We have a possible funding source, but the rules of the council are that we do not apply for any grant that might obligate the city financially in the future without coming to you. If you concur in this evening moving forward, what you're doing is concurring in applying for the grant. You're not saying at this point that you're going to accept the grant. As these fine folks have said, we don't know all of the details as to whether it's going to be at 100% the first year, 75% the second year, and so forth. But we will not find that out until after the time period for filing. If my memory is correct, you must file the grant by the end of, is there a date?
we haven't got the date yet, but according to their website, according to the literature is that they suggested we get approval first because it's going to be a very, very short turnaround time. So we're expecting it to be around September the 1st, because in order for them to turn around those grants and award them by November, November 1st, when the federal budget starts, it's going to have to be a quick turnaround. So not that they have to do it that way, but that's generally how they do it.
You know, Mike, you said November 1st, the federal budget starts. Did you mean October 1st?
I mean, October 1st.
I mean, I know things up in Washington have gotten a little confused, but I wanted to make sure the federal year was still.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I meant to say October.
Okay. The other part to remember is that from a fiscal standpoint, while our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th, and even though the grant may come into effect October 1st, it will take us a time period to actually fill the positions. So realistically, you're probably looking, and this is just a swag, at picking up any financial burden on the city probably beginning in January.
At least, we wouldn't be able to, because the BLET program starts next week, actually, the 15th. Yeah, next week. There's no way we could get enough, and there's no way we could.
With the background process and everything, it would be at the earliest January.
What we'd like to do, we have options, obviously. The options can be any number that you're comfortable with. But the real question is, how do you feel about authorizing the staff to move forward with filing these grants? Given the fact that you are going to have some financial assistance to start off, but there's going to come a point in time where you're going to have a financial obligation that we will have to fully fund. What's your thinking?
So how long is it, you said it was 2011 was the last time we even applied?
Yes.
And we
Got
consciously not done it, or has it not been available?
We just haven't done it because of the financial obligations. There's been other officers added. There was one for domestic violence, and then one for
Or crisis council?
crisis counseling, yes.
And then you've also included the number of SROs in the schools.
We have 3 SROs that are being funded by the school system.
Now, you're asking for authority to just apply for it at this point.
We would have to come back.
Direction as to the number you might feel, when you look at it, eventually the city is going to, using round numbers, if you look at 6 positions, which of course would give 1 per shift, you were looking 3 years roughly down the road of needing to find $600,000 or $700,000 in costs. Now, part of those costs would actually, let me rethink that, you'd actually be picking up the full wages and benefits, because once you secure vehicles and so forth, I know that Ron and Mike like to wrestle over whether a car goes out at 83,000 miles or 250,000 miles. But the real thing to think of is that for every officer we add between salary and benefits, you're generally picking up $80,000 to $100,000 permanent exposure. And of course, we don't know how much of that exposure, but we're asking, would you authorize us to file a grant? And if so, at what level are you comfortable as far as personnel?
Mr. Bittner, you had a question.
Well, just an observation, and then I'm supportive of the program, but I couldn't help but thinking, what was the equivalent number of man hours we picked up with the Dick's Crisis Intervention Center?
Well, of course, it's been open 2 days now. 2 weeks.
But you had an estimate.
Oh,
16,000.
It's 16,000 hours.
16,000 hours.
Yeah. So there were 16,000 hours. There was roughly 11,000 hours that's for mental health, and the rest of that was substance abuse issues that we've been dealing with. So, I mean, it's a very blurred line, so it's hard to determine. But when you look at substance abuse and mental health, we're spending about 16 hours, which is well over $1 million worth of personnel that we're using every year for those kinds of the crisis intervention, and we see that as expanding because we used to spend about 45 minutes on a call about 10 years ago. Now we're spending about 55 minutes. So the time that we're spending is increasing because we're doing more de-escalation, more, encouraging the officers to try to find out a little bit more so they can do some more crisis intervention.
By the way, you and your staff probably haven't got enough credit for, I think, taking the bull by the horns and getting that center developed and funded.
And we're excited about the center opening. In fact, the city manager and I will be attending the first oversight committee meeting tomorrow and talk a little bit about the center's been full for the last week since it opened. That's exciting that we're getting people into that kind of treatment.
I would like to make one note on that. Mr. Thomas and Mr. Lazare represented the city council in that task force. And I know that in our joint session back February of whatever it was, 17, the mayor was the one that suggested that the task force be established. But the leadership and what Mr. Thomas and Mr. Lazare did in attending, not just sitting there, but truly giving ideas and analyzing the opportunity, the two of you are to be commended for representing the staff, the city council the way that you did.
And I'd like to say that's probably the best example I've seen in my career of the community policing process. We brought to you that issue, and not only did y'all took the leadership and said, this is what we need to do, and we got a crisis center, and then we've also applied, as you all have authorized us to apply for some grants to get those folks from the back door into some other kinds of treatment. And I think that's going to be very effective, and I think it's also going to be very effective in something that we've worked on for a number of years, and that's been our property crimes. Our violent crime has been low for a number of years. It's our property crimes that we're trying to challenge, that we've really had the challenge with. And I think that the crisis center and the approach that we're taking for opioid and opioid addiction is going to have some tremendous impacts in the next couple of years.
John, does this require just a consensus, or does this require a motion?
Excuse me, again, you can do it either way, I believe. The only question I would have is, if you get the consensus to do option 1 or 2, and then the council at the later date comes back and says, no, we're not going with that, how does that affect future applications?
I don't think it will impact them at all.
So either way, Mayor.
I got a question. In terms of, I'm wondering about the offset between overtime and adding additional officers. Have you all worked out?
So we don't have the exact numbers, but adding the additional officers should impact our overtime, because as it stands now, the officers, because they are going from call to call and trying to find time to actually do the reports, they're staying over, writing reports. We're managing that as best as we can. And then also our mid-shift, sometimes because of training or vacations or sick, we have to split that mid-shift into the day or night shift, so it actually allow those 3 shifts to actually function, we're hoping, the way that they should.
But to answer your question, I don't think it'll have a lot of impact, because some of it's court, some of it's things we can't control. There are a number of times when an officer it's toward the end of the shift, he makes an arrest, he has to follow through with it, and it may be an hour or 2 hours after the shift. So it will have some impact, but not a lot of impact on overtime.
Just another question, we a couple of years ago, I guess, we did the pay. Probably, I don't even know if it's full 2 years, but probably a year and a half or whatever. I guess that's helped fully staff. Give a little update on that.
That's helped us fully staff, up until the last couple of months, and what we had is some officers leaving because their spouses have been,
Summertime military rotation.
Right, and so that has impacted it a little bit, but for a long period of time, we were full staffed, and we expect that as soon as we get through the hump of the military chain, we're always going to have that. We're always going to have, because we do have some segment of our population is military or military related, and they'll either go home or they'll be be transferred. We had one that was transferred to Germany, yeah. And he was really devastated because he was gonna be working in the PX and he talked about how he was gonna miss his job. You know, I guess when in Germany, there's not much demand for police officers from the United States.
I'll make a motion that we authorize the filing of the application for option one.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any comment or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
I would like to, it's probably the first time that all of the command staff, the new command staff of the police department has been together for the public. I know the council knows these folks, but Mike, if you don't mind, introduce your command staff.
Deputy Chief Weaver, she's in charge of criminal investigations. Deputy Chief Trader is in charge of support services. And Deputy Chief Dorn is in charge of patrol services.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for what you do every day. We appreciate it. Mayor, could we take a 10-minute break?
Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, we'd also like to take a moment to talk with you about our continued study on compensation issues with the city. Tonight, we are going to focus on fire and emergency services. I have with us two of our leaders in the fire department, and obviously we have the chief, who is not only the police chief, but the director of public safety. Amy, you and Sean, introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about how many years you've served in the department.
Okay, I'm a battalion chief with the fire department. I've been with the fire department for almost 20 years. In February, I'll have my 20 years in. I've worked my way through from trainee all the way to where I am right now.
My name's Sean Hayes. I'm normally the assistant fire chief. Right now I'm acting as the interim fire chief. I started in 2005. I actually started on my 20th birthday. That was the age you were hired at back then, so I've been with the city ever since.
It's hard to believe you can have young people like this who have 15 and 20 years worth of service in, and they just barely have gotten old enough to vote. Well done. So the work that we're about to show you is a collaborative effort, not only by the manager's office, but obviously by public safety, and specifically these two people, and also T. Tallman, who is a battalion chief, who is also one of the people who is in the leadership position. Also finance of the city with Gail and her staff, and Kimberly Williams and her staff, especially Tom Sherwood. So what we'd like to do is begin to refresh your memory. 2 years ago, we looked at some of the issues in the police department, and a step plan was prepared. We've also discussed with you citywide the analysis of all of our positions. In FY19, we budgeted $300,000 for analysis. But we had a little event come along that sidestepped us, and hopefully Hurricane Florence's sister or brother won't come along this year and cause us to be interrupted. In the FY20 budget, you did budget $300,000 for wage adjustments citywide. As we said, we're doing a citywide study. There are 563 full-time equivalent positions, and that's really what we're studying. Those are spread over 35 pay grades. And in those 35 pay grades, there are 202 job titles. And as of the end of FY19, which was June 30th, we had analyzed 108 of those job titles. We had 14 pending. We had 80 still to be analyzed. At that time, that meant that we had conducted studies that impacted 222 employees, okay? Looking forward, so far this year, because we wanted this to become a priority, we have now, of the 202 job titles, we've now analyzed 124. So we went from 108 up to 124. There are 11 currently pending, 67 to be conducted. There are 109 employees who potentially could have a pay change due to the 16 analysis that we've done so far. In 19, these are the departments, and you can see the 222 employees. In 20, these are the departments that we have been analyzing: fire, emergency services, media services, telecommunicators, 911, and that's 109 employees. Still pending are these areas. Possibly we'll get to some of them this year. Some of them may be in next year's budget. But obviously, it is a work in process or progress, depending on how you want to look at it. These are other departments, but based upon what we have and will present to you this evening, you would still have 232 employees still to be studied in this fiscal year or next fiscal year. Now, let's talk about the fire step plan. Very similar in structure to the police department step plan. Public safety, if this plan is adopted, would then have a step plan in place for all of the police as well as all of the fire. Now, when I say all, that means those people who are actually eligible to be in a step plan. The fire step plan, very similar to the police step plan, would have trainees, firefighters 1, 2, and 3, driver operators 1 and 2 in the plan. The people who are not in the plan are basically the command staff, so you can see in this area. You will also notice that down towards the bottom, there's a new title called Fire Lieutenants, and we'll discuss with you what that change is in just a minute. These are the people who are not in a step plan, but would be eligible for any cost of living that council approves on a year-to-year basis. The fire step plan starts off for the purpose of what? Encouraging people to move up in their skills and in their responsibilities with the fire department. We do have some people who have been with us for a long period of time who are firefighter 2s. They've received every pay increase that you've ever passed along. Many of them get more money than firefighter 3s, but have not taken on the responsibility. Some of them get more money because of the cost of living increases that you've been generous with. They make more money than driver operator 1s or 2s, but they haven't taken on the responsibility. From a manager standpoint, I believe that our purpose here is to provide service. And I believe that our purpose needs to be met by every city employee, and that if you're going to accept additional money from the taxpayer, you need to be willing to step up and give better service and give more service and take on more responsibility. You'll recall that similar comments that I made to you relative to the police department. So the goal here is to say, unlike the military, up or out, the goal here is the plan is to say, we're going to give you an opportunity to move forward in your career. If you choose not to do that, then your pay gets capped. You don't continue to get COLA after COLA after COLA. What you will get is guaranteed steps to a point, and then after that, you will get a bonus equal to the cost of living, but that bonus never applies to your base salary. So you are capped. One of the concepts that we have run into is talking about our driver operators. In the industry, they now call them primarily engineers. We also know that when the engine arrives on the scene, it is the driver operator 2 who is primarily in charge. So we're talking about that change being called a lieutenant. The driver operator 1, 2s, and 3s, as well as all of the firemen 1, 2, and 3s, these two people and T. Tallman have analyzed the credentials and criteria that we want you to achieve in order to move to the next level. They have instituted and recommended to the manager additional criteria. In the past, it was fairly easy to move from a 1 to a 2, to a 2 to a 3. Those days are going to be changing. We want people to have more skills. We want people to have more responsibility. I commend these two. Obviously, the chief has been part of this, but also T. Tallman for looking at new criteria. In implementing the plan, if it's approved, One of the things we found is that in the people who are currently driver operator twos, not all of them will meet the qualifications for becoming a lieutenant. So where do we place them? They're obviously currently more than engineer one, but they don't qualify to be a lieutenant. So we're recommending that we now have a mid area. You'll have an engineer one, you'll have an engineer two, or a lieutenant. But in the future, no one will move from engineer one to engineer two. You will either be engineer one or you will fully meet the qualifications for the lieutenant. But there is a group of, I believe it's six people who currently are operator twos who don't qualify to be a lieutenant. So we're putting them in a special class called engineer two. No one else, if approved by the plan, no one else will become an engineer two. And you will either move from engineer one to lieutenant, or you'll stay an engineer two. But that number of 6, the only way that it changes is downward. So that if you're an engineer two and you eventually get the necessary qualifications, you can become a lieutenant. So think of it as a tunnel with 6 people in it. If there's gonna be 6 in there forever, or the number's gonna go 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's talk about how the plan will actually work. You saw earlier that trainees, step 1. Firefighters 1 and 2 will have 3 steps and then be capped. Firefighter 3 will have 4 steps and then be capped. Why the difference is because moving up, you have higher criteria. Engineer 1 will have 5 steps and then capped. Engineer 2 will have 3 steps and then capped. Because we don't want, if you're just gonna stay an engineer 2, we're not gonna reward you. Remember, each step is a pay increase. So engineer 2s only have 3 steps. When you become a lieutenant, you're not in the step plan anymore. You're in the COLA or normal city plan. This is the proposal relative to pay. Trainees, firefighter 1s would have 3 steps. You see those steps are $500 apiece.
And a step is 1 year, basically, right?
Step is 1 year, correct. Thank you for that clarification. Now, so in this case, if you adopted and you're a firefighter 1, you will have 3 years to qualify to be a firefighter 2, or your salary is capped. You will not get any more money than $34,500 added to your base pay. However, if council gives a 2% bonus, a 2% cost of living, then doing very quick math, which Gail does not like me to do in public, you're gonna get somewhere around $700. I think it's actually $690, sir. Would that be it? Okay, that was a good guess on my part. But that $690 is a one-time check. It's not anything that impacts your salary as far as your retirement and continuing on. Firefighter 2s, if you notice, the firefighter 1 caps out at $34,500. Firefighter 2s start at $36,000, and they have 3 steps, $500 apiece. So going back, you could start as a trainee. Year 1, you get $33,500, year 2, $34,000, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6. So at the end of 6 years with the city, you could be making $37,000, whereas your first year you were making $33,500. Now, firefighter 3, you'll notice that firefighter 2 capped off at $37,000. Firefighter 3 start at $38,000 with $500 steps. And at the end of step 4, you'll either move to a DO1 or engineer 1, as we'll now call them, or you will be capped. Engineer 1 has 5 steps. Why? Because number 1, to become a lieutenant, you're going to have many more certifications than we've had in the past. And you can see here, you'll start at 42, there'll be $500 steps. At the end of the 5th year, you'll get 44,000, and after that, you'll be capped unless you've met all the criteria to become a lieutenant. Now, because of the group that doesn't currently qualify to move from a driver operator 2 into the lieutenant slot, we have a small group that will have the engineering operator 2 applied to it, 3 steps. $45,000 to start, then $750 step, another $750 step, and then capped. The lieutenants in the pay plan will start now at $48,000, and from that point on, there's no guarantee other than whatever cost of living you pass on. Fire company officers likewise with $52,500 per the pay plan, eligible for the COLA. As you can see, it's very similar to what we did for the police department. The cost, including all the benefits, that's all of the retirement, all of the other costs that we have, is $163,230. You remember you budgeted $300,000 for the plan. So we feel that this is a program that from a management standpoint would be beneficial in several ways. Number one, we think you can afford it. That's probably the most important that you look at. Why can you afford it? Well, interestingly enough, in the normal fire department budget, there's about $100,000 budgeted each year for people moving through their ranks from firefighter 1 to firefighter 2 to firefighter 3. That's already built into your budget and has in fact been part of the budgets for a long time. To be honest with you, I never realized that. So about a third of this money, we feel very comfortable, and maybe even half of this money is already in your budget. Now, why do I only say a third or a half? There will be people who will be moving up who will not be in the step plan. Remember, lieutenants, when somebody gets promoted to that, or captains, battalion chiefs, and so forth. So it's a plan that I believe you can afford. The second thing is it takes both of your major public safety divisions and it puts them both on the step plan. I will tell you from a morale standpoint, I remember one of the council members sitting around the table who used to be a city manager, and I won't mention which one that is, but I think you know that he's wearing what color shirt would you say that is? Pink? Pink. When we adopted the police pay plan, we were walking out the door and he whispered to me, "When are you gonna bring us the fire plan?" Well, firemen and policemen like to be treated the same. And so from a morale standpoint, I think that this is a step in the right direction. The other thing that I will mention to you is that most of this money would have been outlaid if you had adopted simply the cost of living program for them. Remember, what we did was we said people who potentially are going to be in this step plan will not receive any cost of living, but that will be put into a holding pattern until you decide on the step plan for the fire. The most important change, though, from my standpoint, that a taxpayer should be interested in is it requires firefighters to constantly move forward with their credentials and better expertise, or they simply don't continue to get the cost of living pay. It's a pay for performance type plan. Now, before we open it up to questions from you, these two people and Mike have been very instrumental in this. I would like to ask y'all to comment on the proposal. First of all, is this a plan that y'all put together?
It is. We put a lot of hours, a lot of time into creating a plan that was fair and doable to present to you today. So
And have you shared this with your personnel?
we have.
And what was their response?
Overall, very favorable for the plan. Yes.
Chief?
I might add that I was impressed by the thought process that they had about moving people and getting people trained in different aspects of fire services, whether it was the rescue teams, the technical rescue teams, and being able to encourage them to do that. So I think this plan does that. And with the police department, when I talk to the officers, we talk a little about the plan. They were very pleased with how the plan's been implemented in the police department. So I think we're going to see the same kind of acceptance in the fire department as well.
Any other thoughts y'all want to give before we open up to questions?
We did look, like you said, we looked at what we needed moving forward for the organization as far as requirements for each rank. And that's why we added those into each rank structure to justify the dollars that go along with this.
A prime example would be, we currently have certified water rescue technicians, but Hurricane Florence showed us with the number of rescue missions we were going on, we could certainly use more certified water rescue technicians. That's just one example of something that we identified.
And which class, in your step plan, which class would that water rescue apply to?
They would get the basic courses, which is your technical rescuer general and the firefighter, to qualify for firefighter 2. And to get to firefighter 3, they would have to get either a confined space, water rescue, or a high ankle certification. A specialty certification is what we call that.
I think that pushes them toward, as folks retire and things change, having enough firefighters trained in those particular specialties will help us maintain a good level of service. So I think the plan also does that. It gives us a real sustainable effort as far as the very diverse things that the fire department does, whether it's high angle rescue, whether it's vehicle extrication to water rescue to hazardous materials. So it's a well thought out. Their process is well thought out to move folks to engage in those kinds of specialties.
Questions and thoughts, please.
So the initial cost you say is this?
Yes, sir.
What's the next year?
Well,
What's
Jim,
an annual cost?
when most of this cost is because you are putting people into the step plan. So you have to move people to get them on the step plan. Now, the annual operating cost for this, Gail, do you remember the actual number? I think it's about.
You were gonna ask.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was.
My memory is it's about $100,000, which is what's in their budget.
It seems like it's a good plan, I guess, but now, is there not like a bottleneck when you're gonna hit their, you go from with the different categories? I mean, there's not open-ended numbers of lieutenants, say, for instance.
Well, in reality, let me answer it this way. In theory, it would be nice to have every police officer become a corporal or larger. In the police department, you do have a bottleneck that starts at sergeant. In the fire department, we would like every firefighter to at least be an engineer 1. That's the top of the, now, once you get to that point, there will become a bottleneck. Some may say it's at the lieutenant area, some will say at the engineer 1. The reality is we currently have how many vacancies for driver operator 1? We have 8. Now, why do we have 8? Well, because we don't require upward mobility. We need those driver operators, because guess what? If you don't have anybody drive the truck to the fire, it doesn't matter how many guys ride the tailboard, right? Okay. So there is the theoretic bottleneck, and then there's going to be what I call the realistic application of the plan. Hopefully, I mean, I would hope that 5 years from now, the problem that you're facing is that everybody wants to be a lieutenant, that they've all qualified for it. That's not reality, though.
Are those steps you mentioned for various positions, engineer, what were there, 4 steps or something?
Yeah, so let's go back a second.
Are those annual steps, or can someone jump from 2 to 4?
No, they're annual steps.
Annual steps, okay.
And let's discuss that a minute. One of the things that was a surprise to me is that if you meet all the current criteria, you can move from the trainee all the way to the driver operator in a very short period of time. And you can get a very nice increase in pay. And guess what? There are some firefighters who are so committed and so professional that they do that. What this will do is put a quote-unquote regulator on how fast you move, because you are going to be moving step by step.
So, I mean, you brought up an interesting point. So if somebody is a firefighter 3, are you requiring them to move through the steps before they can go to engineer 1? Or can they get to engineer 1 before then by their certifications and education?
The answer is they could actually move quicker, and let's go back to engineer 1. Okay, there are 5 steps there. Because of the new skill set, it would be very difficult for a person to actually go from step 1 to step 2 and immediately jump.
Okay.
On the other hand, it's very realistic to think that some, if they're motivated, will go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and then jump,
Okay.
or at least to step 4 and then jump. But y'all deal with this every day. Do you agree with that description or disagree?
We do. And a prime example of the regulators, you called it, to move from engineer to lieutenant, we will have a task book in place. We actually already have it. That task book takes you at least 720 hours to complete. There's built-in certification classes you have to complete, as well as certain amounts of, we call it seat time, riding in as the captain on the engine, as well as handling some personnel issues, handling other administrative tasks. You have to be signed off on each one of those tasks. So that task book alone is at least 720 hours to move up, and that's not something they can accomplish in a relatively short period of time.
What are you searching for tonight?
What we would like to do this evening, if possible, is to ask you to authorize us to implement the plan. If you want additional information, we'll be happy to have that identified and brought back. I think on the other hand, if you're not in favor of the step plan at all, just let us know so we can move on to other tasks.
Council, probably need a motion.
I make a motion that we set into motion the fire department step plan.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
Okay. One other, let me get to, just to also let you know, there are 2 other areas that we have looked for the compensation analysis. These are simply equity issues. They're not step plans or anything like that. But in media services and telecommunications, we're also proceeding with these adjustments. With the telecommunications, you will then have everybody in the public safety department other than your civilians.
That's the records clerks and the administrative assistants and the police service officers.
And those will be studied. We're trying to get that full department finished in the study, so those will be forthcoming. And with that, the summary would be, as you see here, out of the $300,000, we would have committed all but $80,000 of it. So, and again, there may be a little bit more than that because of what I mentioned in the fire department's basic budget, that money relative to the internal promotions. Folks, any other things?
No, sir.
I would like to thank Amy and Pete and Sean. They've done a great job of the leadership. They're so much younger than I am. For me to think of them being the leader of the fire department is like, really, these people are practically, pardon the expression, youngsters. But they're committed to this city, and we appreciate what you do.
And I would like to say Chief Tallman had planned on being here tonight, but he's the battalion chief on duty, and they had a fuel leak over by the food line at Gum Branch and Western, so he was on that, and that caused him to run over and miss part of this.
Thank him for us.
Yes, sir, I will.
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate it.
Members of the Parks and Recreation staff who'd like to come up. Jason Miles, would you come sit next to the mayor, please? As we said, Jason has joined the group as our city engineer. He comes with excellent background in the private sector as well as public sector work. We also have members of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board here. We have at least 2. Good, nice to have you all with us. We invited all of them. We also told them that they could watch on G10. So I'm assuming they're sitting home with their popcorn and RCOla colas and enjoying what's going to happen. A quick refresher, pictures tell 1,000 words. This is Jack Amyette as of September the 15th, 2018. If you notice in the upper portion towards the middle of this picture, those are not extra lights that have been put in for shooting free throws. That's the sky. Now, when the hurricane left us, we did a very quick assessment of the overall facility. Now, interestingly enough, this is the benefit of having a drone. Glenn and his staff, primarily Kevin, have become very proficient in flying the drone, and this picture was just recently taken. And you can see from the external what the building really looks like. You also see that the building is actually made up of 2 buildings, a 1-story building, a 2-story building. The greatest damage occurred to the 2-story building. The roof came off, the water came in, literally everything in the building was ruined. Electrical, HVAC, scoreboards, floor, everything. Fortunately, the 1-story building, while it had damage, that damage was less. And that damage was caused when the roof of the 2-story building peeled, it punched holes in the 1-story and so forth. Now, the comment that soccer ball was actually,
Tom Hanks soccer ball.
that's a good one.
Wilson. That's what happened, huh? Changed his name to Franklin.
That's good. I like it. Okay. Wow. You can see the level of damage. Of course, on the other hand, you can also see the phenomenal facility that you built. You know, look at what you've accomplished in the last 9 or 10 years. You took a facility that was functional, but had really not been really addressed. You've put in almost $1,800,000 of improvements. You can see the ball field, which is the best baseball field that anyone would want. You can see the splash pad, which is now enjoyed every day in the summer. You can see the restrooms, which are getting ready. I guess, are they open yet?
They're open and heavily used.
Heavily used. That's good. So it's better to heavily use them than to use the splash pad. Okay.
Yes.
That's good. And you can also see that we have outdoor basketball courts where you used to have some of the older housing, and you can also see the parking. This facility is critical to your overall recreation program, and you're quite aware of that. But going back to the settlement itself, remember, well, I'll show you one other, that to the left of this picture, you also remember that you have the school. And we have a great partnership with the school. Clyde Irwin has become one of the staple elementary schools in Jacksonville. We're very fortunate that school exists. you can see the level of damage that occurred. The 16th of September, the city did a sweep of all of your facilities, and we came up with a list. And on the 19th of September, we began to file insurance claims with our insurance carrier. And remember, our insurance carrier is the North Carolina League of Municipalities Risk Pool. So basically, 3 days after the storm, we filed the initial report. We obviously could not identify at that time numbers as far as money, but we could definitely identify through pictures and documentation the level of damage. In November, roughly 2 months after the storm, the city hired our architectural firm, which you know is John Sawyer. Technically, their name is Sawyer Sherwood and Associates. And they were hired to do an assessment of the damage from a financial standpoint. They were asked the question, figure out how much would it cost us to put Jack Amyette back to the pre-storm day. Why did we ask that? Well, I think there are many people sitting around this table who've had the fun, or lack thereof, of dealing with insurance companies in trying to repair their own residences or businesses. Insurance companies have their numbers. The city needed to have our numbers. So we hired the company and they began an analysis. From that analysis, in January of 2019, they submitted their report back to the city. So in less than 60 days, or roughly 60 days, they came back and said, to put Jack Amyette back exactly like it was, but in a new condition and meeting the new codes, is $763,712. Might as well say $750,000. They also identified that in addition to that, you were going to have A&E. The $750,000 is basically construction. What are you going to pay a contractor? You're also going to have architects and engineers and testing. So we identified about another $120,000 that we were going to have to expend. All of that was submitted to the league. Now, as you can imagine, the League of Municipalities, because it covers the entire state, and many counties and many cities were hit by the storm, they weren't able to get back with us in 2 days to say we agree or disagree. They hired an independent adjuster. In June, the city, literally 6 months after we filed our claim, their adjuster came back and said, because we hadn't shared our number. I remember our number was $763,000. Their adjuster came back in June and said $759,000. They were within $4,000, and we said, boy, that was a lucky break. So, where are we? In the last several weeks, we had a meeting by phone, conference call. John and others, finance and others, were on the conference call, and we said, folks, we're ready to settle this claim, and we'll accept your number of $759,000. Now we have a $22,500 deductible, so it's actually less than $759,000. But you're missing an important part, and that is the soft cost that the city's going to have to incur in order to give the bid to do the hard cost. And they said, well, we'll pay that when you actually incur them. Well, there's only one problem with that. At this point, we really don't know what you're going to want to build back there. And we also know that everybody is interested in a different option, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But at the end of the day, the league has said they will consider a total settlement. They will consider the $759 minus our deductible, and they will consider the soft cost, but we have to better document them. So at the end of last week, we forwarded to them our soft cost. They're currently analyzing. I talked to the league representative Mr. Eichelberger today. He said that he had been on vacation and that he would try to get to those so that John and I and others can have a conference call to try to finally come to a total number. But we think that that total number, well, let me say it this way. We know that that total number will be $759,000 and change minus your deductible of $22,500. Whether we will get any more of what we think is $115,000 to $120,000 in soft costs is yet to be determined. What I'd hope tonight is that we would have in front of you a number that would say, will you authorize the management to settle this? Now, technically, I don't have to ask that. But because of the level of money and the level of damage, I feel very strongly that you need to at least concur in the number that as the manager I'm authorized to accept. So the goal here is to see how much of the, pick a number, $120,000 of soft costs we're able to get the league to agree to pay. Why would we want to do that? Well, number one, the quicker we close the claim, the quicker we have some money. But number two, they're not going to pay you for soft cost for an expanded facility. So let's just say for discussion purposes, when you look at some of the options which are being brought to you just for thought concepts tonight, that you like concept whatever. And that's not rebuilding Jack Amyette just like it is. Well, how do you then determine how much of the new architectural and engineering fees for a much bigger facility they're going to pay? And you know what they're probably going to say? They're not going to pay any of it. So what we're trying to do is negotiate for those soft costs that most likely you're not going to expend, because I don't believe that you're actually going to rebuild Jack Amyette like it was. That's your decision, not mine. So that's pretty much where we are, except for this slide. Susan needs space. We have been very fortunate that Melody, raise your hand, Melody, and Melody. Boy, that's hard for me to keep those two ladies together. But they have been very instrumental in running the programs. Melanie runs the school programs and summer programs, correct?
Yes.
And she has been carting children around the entire city and doubling up on facilities for 7, 8, 9 months now. We sent out a bid for a portable classroom. Bids came back for 1 year, $48,000. When I saw that, I said to the staff and to Alan Baker, before we spend $48,000 on a portable classroom, how much would it cost us just to take the one-story building that didn't have that much damage and get it operational? Now, unfortunately, I didn't think about that 5 months ago. But the point is, Alan got to work and it's about $40,000. And guess what? If you don't have a decision made by the end of 1 year and you're renting that portable, the cost continues to go up. If you spend the $40,000, you've at least stabilized your expenditures and you've got us back in business, at least partly back in business at Jack Amyette. So where we are right now is I have authorized the expenditure of up to $40,000 for these items. One of the things that always is interesting is government red tape. Because we will be filing with FEMA, and actually have filed with FEMA to cover our $22,500 deductible, I did not realize that that also put us into all of the purchasing regulations of FEMA for spending this $40,000. What that means is that while we went out and got bids, we did not necessarily meet all of the federal criteria for those bids. So we've had to go back and start the bidding process over. So that means that instead of being operational, by the start of school, we're now looking at being operational probably by October. But that gives you, hopefully, and gives the public a good update on where we are with the Jack Amyette facility and also, why it takes so long. Y'all could have, the very next day, authorized us to spend money and get everything back exactly like it was. I think on the other hand, any homeowner who's dealt with this understands that while you may have a nice contingency fund or fund balance, as we call it, sometimes you need to really think about what you're doing. Any questions about that part of the presentation before we talk about some concepts? Any concerns about where we are on that? You will also remember that you authorized the staff to go out, and we thank Mr. Jackson. He became part of the Shoe Leather Express on knocking on doors and trying to get input. And we got over 400 inputs. And as I told the league the other day, we have 7 council members and we have at least 9 opinions of what we should do from those 7. And then you add the 400 responses we got from the public, what you have is almost anything anybody could ever think about. So let's look a second at some of your options. What's our real goal? You could say our goal is to patch the roof, get back in operation. I think your real goal is to determine what's the best future for the whole park. What's your best future for Jack Amyette? Long after I have retired and most of y'all are still, well, I'll say all of y'all are still serving on council, you're gonna have to decide what's the best future. So what we'd like to do tonight is give you some considerations. We're not asking you to vote. We're asking you and the public, and obviously the advisory committee is here, to begin a dialogue of options. And what we've also done with Jason's background, and we also have Talia. Talia, would you raise your hand? Talia is a young lady who I actually had an indirect connection with in Fort Myers, Florida, where our company was. But she comes from a great engineering background. Where'd you go to school?
High school, Bishop Rowe, but Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach.
Yes, excellent engineering school. She's an engineering intern with us. So she comes with a lot of great experience, and of course Jason is there also. But we're going to discuss with you some options, and we're also going to show you some projected cost. I'll say at this point, be prepared. Okay. Option 1 is to use the existing center, repurpose and gain new program space, better entrance to the parking lot. In other words, instead of the entrance coming off of South Drive, it would actually be reconfigured, as you'll see in a minute, to come off the parking lot, and potential cost savings. In this option, you would actually lose the gym as a basketball gym, but hang on with that. The other thing that each option, and one of the things that Susan and I have talked, and Michael, we want to create a master plan for every park. What your master plan, your recreation master plan did was, from a consultant standpoint, it took you to a theoretic point, but it did not take you into each park to say, and here's the actual master plan for that park. So for example, the master plan that was done probably a decade ago now, what it said was, this is a regional park. What it didn't say is what should be in it. What are the nuts and bolts? So at a point in time, we want to create a master plan like this for every one of our larger parks. In this master plan, what you would see is the expanded building, which you'll see in a minute. You'd see bullpens and batting cages built. Now, not at this point. This is the master plan that you would phase in over time. You would have dugouts. Well, we got dugouts now. We're talking about really nice dugouts. You would have grandstands built. You would have shelters, and you would have the playground. And obviously, you're going to have the bathrooms, and you're going to have the other facilities that are there for the splash pad and the parking and the outdoor. So eventually, a master plan like this would be prepared for every park. Details, not just we're going to improve the park. In this concept, what you're concentrating on is the dark blue. What would the building look like? Well, the footprint is in orange, and what you'd have there is athletic courts, not necessarily basketball courts. What does that mean? Well, you could have pickleball there certain times of the day and play side to side. Or you could take your youngest basketball leagues and have them play side to side. But what you wouldn't have is a full-size court, because you don't have one now for basketball. You can also see that at the front of the building, possibly you'd install, based upon a lot of the input from the public, you could have the kitchenette stay where it is, but be modernized. You could have fitness areas. But in this concept, the pink, you'd now come in off the parking lot. You would see that you also have classrooms and multipurpose rooms and offices. So what you'd be adding is additional space of about 1,200 square feet. I think actually it's 1,180 square feet. And so the total facility would be about 9,700 square feet. Again, you'd be fixing the building, you'd be expanding the building. Using some reasonable cost estimates, repair the existing, we know $750,000. You'd be adding about 1,200 square feet, and at $200 a square foot, because you're into a one-story building, not a two-story. I think Mr. Warden would agree 200 a square is not an unreasonable number. You're looking at another $250,000. You're also needing to build a parks maintenance storage facility over there, because at the back of that building today, you remember we have a very small storage area. That's where you store a lot of miscellaneous parks equipment. Because that's a metal building on a concrete floor, you're about $100 a square. Then you have site work and you have design work. So option one is just a swag. We can't guarantee. Architects would probably tell you a much better number. But from Jason's experience and Talia and my experience, you're looking at 1.4 million. And again, what you're getting is basically the same building with about 1,200 square foot of expansion, but everything modernized. Option two. Well, option two would remove the current building completely. What you'd be building, pardon me, is a community center. 9,600 square feet. Let's go back a second. You'll notice option one was 9,600 square feet and change. Option two is 9,600 square feet, all new. You'd have better use of the corner lot, increased program space, potential cost savings without a gym, relocate the park maintenance, additional parking and flow. You would in fact lose the gym. And again, you can see the rest of the master plan. Here's what the new building would look like. And from a construction standpoint, this is probably the cheapest type of construction because you're building a rectangle or a square. Every time you have a break in a building, every time you have a wing added, costs go up. But in this case, you would see that you'd come off the parking lot again, and these are nothing but concepts. You would see offices, kitchens, multi-purpose rooms around, fitness centers, game rooms, classrooms, computer rooms, restrooms. You would not, in this concept, have a gym. What you'd have is a community center. Recreation would be focused external to the building. Just a concept. Now in this, the price is shown, 200 a square, 100 a square, and you're roughly up another $1 million, $2.4 million. Option three. Well, remembering that we have a great relationship with the school and that the school has needs also, option three actually moves the building from its current site and puts it over on land that technically is in the ownership of the school board. Well, set that aside a moment. I think with a good relationship you have with the school board and with the fact that the school could possibly use the gym for many things, option three builds a new 19,000 square foot facility, one large court, and other things that you'll see in a minute. Here is basically what that building would look like. A large gym, you can read around there, everything from offices to multi-purpose to fitness areas, game rooms, And guess what? It comes at a pretty hefty price. Now here, you will notice that the average square foot has gone up to $250 a square. Why is that? Well, a lot of that building is gonna cost you $300 to $320 a square foot, because you're talking about large spans in a gym. You know, I remember in my younger days, we played on outdoor basketball courts. And when they invented gyms, you know, while it was nice in there, if you put in a center column and half court, it could be a difficult thing. So Mr. Wharton can tell you that when you start having large expanses, the structural components go up in price. So we're averaging $250 a square, but I want to remind you, part of that is that in the gym part, you're talking probably $300 to $320 a square. In the other part, you may be down to $180, $200 a square, but it's not inexpensive. And in this option, you know, you're getting into real money, as they say. Option 4 is similar to option 3, but it, you know, looking at the long-term needs of recreation, one of the things that we know is that we have outgrown our gym space. So this is a concept that what you would do is really maximize gym space by having 2 full-size courts. Here, what you'd have is the ability to have 2 full-size courts or 4 side-to-side courts. This would become the primary location for all of your basketball activities. The commons would still be there, but if you're going to build 2 major courts here, you can see the investment you're putting in. And again, you can see the other configuration. And don't be surprised when you see that number. Now, option 5 is use the existing center with 2 courts. Here's what it would look like, and here's the cost. Bottom line is, nobody really has determined what you should do at Jack M yet, other than the fact that the public and you and the advisory board have all said Jack M yet's important in our recreation program. What you do there, though, we're not ready to recommend, nor do I think you're ready to even begin the financial discussion. I think that the reality is money is going to dictate what you do. And what we have to do is get at least the daytime programs back in operation by spending the $40,000. And then over the next months to year, for you to decide what do you want to do. Now, my recommendation would be, again, we're going to print these out. We're going to get them on the website for the public. We're going to get them in your hands. We can't guarantee that these are numbers that you can count on. What we can tell you, though, is we think they're realistic. They're at least in the ballpark. They're not $116 a square, which is what you were told about another major recreation complex. This thing is going to cost you money. The reality is the public needs more recreation space. Now, whether you do some of these things at Jack M Yet, or you do something at Jack M Yet and you do others at other facilities, those are challenges that you're going to have as the elected officials for several years ahead. And of course, the higher the number, the more justification Gail can use to go for a bond issue. I would say to you, you're probably not going to get a bond issue. Well, I can tell you right now, it would be impractical to go to a bond issue for option 1 or 2. I mean, bond issues need to be for big ticket things. Jason, you and Talia and Susan have all added to this. I've been just the voice of the message tonight. You want to add anything to this, Jason?
Not particularly, sir. I think you've covered it pretty well.
Susan?
I would just like to add that we looked at, in looking at all of these options, we tried to hear the input from our citizens and try to hit some of those things that was, requested and or sought. And so we tried to look at a very large, broad perspective in these options. That was our goal, was just to look at anything and everything and still try to meet the needs on some level from what we're seeing from a recreation department, from what our patrons are seeing, and then as well as the input from the citizens. So we're open to suggestions if there's anything we missed. Again, these were just ideas trying to take everything into account and put them somewhere in some sort of thought process for a council to look at.
Certainly not asking you to comment on options, but is this the type of information you wanted from the staff, or are we on the wrong channel? You want to give us different directions?
On some of your options, especially the one next to the school, what would happen to the existing building?
In that concept, you could either keep it for certain uses. Our recommendation would be that if you keep any of it, that it would just be the one-story portion, that the back area would be torn down.
And I know it's still early, but I know you thought about going to the school board because they've got other needs too. But I mean, just to see if there's any interest in helping with one of those options.
Yes, and obviously we would not, the way that we operate with you is you hear it first. So, now that you've heard it, we can certainly begin to discuss things with other entities, including the school board.
See if there's any interest at all.
One thing I would like to say is that I'm glad that hopefully in the real near future that we'll get services back to New River, because we had a GED program there, mentoring program, and they have, really have been able to operate. It's sad with the gym because we cut out, the basketball program for the little guys. So also though, had you thought about visits for similar facilities of that nature?
When we get to that part of I'm going to use the baseball analogy, not a football analogy, because this is not going to be a 4-quarter event. This is going to be a 9-inning event. At a point in time, I think we're in the first inning right now. You're beginning to see some concepts. As y'all begin to refine some of your thoughts, we certainly want to have you and the advisory board members go visit, because it's just like sitting at home thinking about buying a truck. Well, until you go to the lot and actually start seeing, Mr. Bittner, some of the nice options that they have today, all it is theory. But you really need to walk through. So you're correct, probably the 3rd inning of this game, we will look at how we begin to expose you to real facilities that have been built.
And if I could add, I'm happy to send Dr. Woodruff the information. If you'll remember months and months ago, I went back and actually compared. It's interesting that I had in that presentation the different types of facilities with the different square footage and the different options there. And there are some very similarities to these options as well. So I'm happy to send you those links so you can look at what Goldsboro has, Raleigh has, Greensboro has, because they were the ones that primarily had the most recent examples with similar facilities prior to Florence ever getting to us, is what I had presented. So I can certainly do that, so you can at least take a look at some of those.
We're not asking you to do anything tonight except accept this for information. You want to give us any different direction, or are you comfortable with us just keeping you posted?
So, excuse me, go ahead.
My question I was gonna ask, with these new configuration, is there any guidance in towards whether or not these buildings might be also fitted for future uses? We hate to say it, for hurricane as a shelter. Would it be brought up to code that it could withstand if you needed an extra space? Could it be utilized for that? So that would be, if we're talking about building something ground up or adding something, is that the possibility we might use this as a designated shelter if we need it?
The answer there is yes. Those would be discussions that y'all would have in what I'm gonna call the 6th inning, when we actually get into architectural design work. I would also remind you though the city's function, the city does not have a responsibility as far as a shelter. On the other hand, if the county is looking for new shelters, maybe that's part of the funding option where you talk to the county about, okay, if we build this certain, are you willing to add certain money to have an additional shelter? But that's a good thought. Mayor, you were gonna ask a question?
No, she covered it. TDA obviously too, we're talking about a two-court facility, probably not a one-court, but certainly a two-court maybe. Okay.
Thank the staff for excellent work on this.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good, good job.
I know the hour is late and we still have a little bit of business to conduct. Let me ask Glenn if he will move very quickly to, I think we had a one city moment. Glenn, is that what's up next? Okay, real quickly, let's just run through some of these. You can see another step in demolishing. This occurred on a house that was just down the street from City Hall on Johnson Boulevard. Please keep going. Just roll through them. Now, hang on a second. We sent out a questionnaire that said, does anybody recognize this? Yeah. So Mayor, if you will stand up. This is first place in the manager's guess the location contest. So congratulations, Mayor.
Just the first annual.
Just to show you that Mr. Lazara filed a claim, a challenge on the basis that he was working. So we, in Mr. Lazara's absence, he's working again tonight, here is his second place award. And, this is what you get when you're number 2 in the organization, so pass that around. But I'd like to also show you, this is the lowest point. If you want to know how dry your community's been, this time last year, on August the 1st of last year, you'd had 33 inches of rain at the land out. As of August the 1st, 2019, you had 17 inches of rain. The difference is 12 feet in elevation. You see more of the liner today than you have ever seen.
Yeah.
The other important thing though is, guess what? If you remember, what was it, 7, 8 years ago, we talked about needing to do some improvements out there. Well, guess what? The water's now low enough for us to do it. Kind of hard to cut a hole in the dike when the water's 12 feet deep. One city moment, appreciation for fire and emergency services. People were in a hotel room, found they couldn't get out. Their keys, the electronic lock wouldn't work. So fire and emergency services showed up, and in less than 5 minutes, they had the people out. And this was the letter of commendation which was sent to the mayor and council. They represented themselves as well as the city of Jacksonville, Onslow County very well. Our thanks again to the Jacksonville Fire Department, very respectfully, Roger Jones. Good stuff. National Night Out, you were there. You know what an amazing success. Now the chief is going to tell you there was 40,000 people there. I don't have any idea. I've heard numbers everywhere from 10 to 12 to 14,000. You pick any number you want. The reality is it was probably the biggest turnout in recent years. And by the way, in case you don't know, that's Keith Williams, Kimberly Williams' husband. Great singer. Let's go back to that one a second. Watch for Me, School Safety, that's good, by Transportation, MPO. We had practically every city department represented there. And what was amazing, if you had walked with me out the front door at 11:30 last night, you would not have known that the event even occurred other than traffic cones left. That's how quickly and how well oiled that machine is now that involves every department in hosting something like this. It's not just a police event anymore, is it, Mayor? citywide event.
Community event.
And the nice thing, of course, we ended with a phenomenal fireworks display. We would like, if you don't mind, if we could take a few minutes to go into closed session. I know the hour's late, but we have two matters of business we really need to discuss with you.
I need a motion to go into closed session to discuss some property acquisition at 701 New Bridge Street and 1375 Oswald Drive, and also personnel matters.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.